Hello everyone, so we're going to go ahead and do a very quick review of factoring and solving polynomials. Now the first thing that we need to know or remember is what the zero product property is. The zero product property says that if the product of two numbers is zero, then one of the numbers must be zero. So what does this mean? Let's say we have two numbers, A and B, and if we were to take their product, in other words, if we were to multiply these two, and we find that the answer is 0, this means that either A is 0 or B is 0, right? Because when you multiply two numbers and it equals 0, one of them definitely has to be 0. So we're going to use this fact in helping us solve and factor these polynomials. All right, so the first case when we are factoring is where A is equal to 1. Now, this expression might look familiar because it is a quadratic, right? A quadratic expression. So if you think back to Algebra 1, we have ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just numbers. Now, like I said, in this very first case, a is going to be equal to 1. So if I go ahead and substitute in 1 for a, here's what the equation actually reads. It says x squared plus bx plus c, right? And here's the thing. When we factor, we do something that's called the x method. And here's what that x method looks like. You draw yourself a nice big X. Sometimes people like to call this the magic X. Whatever you want to call it, it's going to be really the same thing. Now, we're going to go and we're going to take a look at our expression, and the number C, we're going to write that in the top of our X, whatever the value of C is. And then the number for B, whatever that value is going to go in the bottom. And then here's the basic idea. We need to find two factors on the left and on the right. In other words, two numbers. And these two numbers need to multiply. Or in other words, their product needs to be that number or that value for C. And these two same numbers also need to add or sum to whatever number B is, okay? So this is how we use the X method or the magic X to factor polynomials and solve. So once more, we write the X, and then whatever value we have for C, that's going to go in the top of this X, and whatever value we have for B, that's going to go in the bottom of this X. And then our task is to find two numbers that will multiply to give us C, and will add to give us B. Let's go ahead and look at an example. All right, so in example 1 here, it's asking us to factor and solve the following equation. Now, what we see here in this equation, first of all, what we should notice is that our equation is actually not set equal to 0. Now, think back to the zero product property rule. If I'm going to factor an expression, in other words, find numbers that will multiply, they have to equal 0. Because if not, then I cannot assume the value of any of those factors. Because the reality is there could be an infinite amount of possibilities. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to set the equation equal to 0. And how we're going to do that is we are going to go ahead and just add 3 on both sides of the equation. And when we do that, then we get x squared minus 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now, the reason why the 3 does not combine with any of the other terms is, of course, because these are not like terms. The 3 is just a number, whereas you have an x squared and a 4 times an x. So these are all different terms, so we need to write them separately. All right, so from here, let's go ahead and let's factor using the X method or the magic X. The number that needs to go in the top of this X is going to be our C value, which is this plus 3. And yes, keep in mind that positives and negatives do make a huge difference in our answer, okay? But anyways, plus 3 in the top of this x, and then we are going to go ahead and take a look at our value for b, which is a -4, and that number is going to go in the bottom of our x. Now we're tasked with finding two terms that will multiply to 3 and will add to get a -4. Now, taking a look at this here, the number that we want to consider is this 3, the number that we're going to multiply to. Because if we try to find two numbers that add to be -4, there's literally an infinite amount of possibilities. So that doesn't help us narrow down our choices. But if we simply look at the factors for 3, let's go ahead and quickly do just that. There's really only two factors, and it is 1 and 3. This has to do with the fact that 3 is a prime number. So it's only divisible by itself and 1. Great, so we have our two factors, but the other thing we also have to consider is, are these factors positive or negative? So here's the thing. Because I know that when they multiply, I need to get a positive 3, this gives me two choices. Either both of my factors are positive or both of my factors are negative. So based on this, I can now go ahead and consider my value for b. So the first part of this, we only need to take a look at the factors for 3. And then we need to determine whether we have positive or negative factors. And then to do that, we need to go ahead and look at the -4 in the bottom of this x. Because again, my two factors have to add to give me a -4. And the two factors that will add to get you a -4 is going to be -1 and 3. So those are going to be the two factors that I'm going to write into our magic x. Now, we're going to go ahead and we are going to rewrite this all factored out. So this is how we're going to write it. We're going to take x, and we're going to subtract 1 because I have a -1. And this is going to get multiplied with x plus 3 because we have a positive 3, so that gives us x plus 3. Now, to double check your work, what you could do is you can FOIL or distribute, in other words, multiply all the terms back together and see if you end back up with the original expression here. If you don't, double check your work because maybe one of your factors is incorrect. And you might need to change that around, okay? All right, but now we have technically two numbers that multiply and we get 0, which means that one of these expressions has to be equal to 0. So the next step here, what we're going to do is we are going to set each of these factors equal to 0. Okay, and then from here, we can go ahead and solve each one. We're going to go and add a 1 here on both sides. And that gives me x is equal to 1. And then on the other expression, I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3. And this gives me x is equal to -3. So final answer for this problem here, or final solution, I should say, is that x is equal to 1 and x is also equal to -3. Again, you can double check your answers by taking these values for x and substituting them back in, and both sides of the equation should be equal no matter which value you use. All right, so go ahead and pause the video here and see if you can give this one a try on your own. All right, so go ahead and double check over your answers. Once more, the key here was to find two factors of -27, which was my value for C. And there were two pairs of factors that were possible, right? We can have a -3 and +9, or we can have a +3 and a -9. But only one of those factors will add to give me a +6, and that is the pair where 9 is positive and 3 is negative, okay? All right, now, of course, if we're going to have a scenario where a is equal to 1, now we're going to have a scenario where a is not equal to 1. In other words, a is some other number like 3, 4, 29, etc., right? We can still, of course, use the x method. It's just going to look a little bit different this time. But here's what we have to do first. We're actually going to take this a value and we are going to multiply it to the value of c. So here's what the equation is now going to read. It's going to say x squared plus bx plus a times c. Okay. Keep in mind this is technically one number. It's just I had to write it separately as 2 because I don't know what a and c are right now. But after we do that, what we've basically done is we have kind of reset our expression, our quadratic expression, to have an a term of 1. So from here, we're going to go ahead and, like I said, we will use that x method or the magic x. It's just slightly different this time. I'm going to go ahead and draw that x out. But here's what I'm going to add. I'm going to add in a horizontal line. This horizontal line is telling me to divide. What am I going to divide? I will go and let you know in just a moment. But same exact thing, the way we fill it in. The value or the number that is here at the very end of our expression is going to go in the top. So I'm going to go ahead and write a times c in the top of that x right there. And then, of course, b is going to go right in the bottom of the x. Now, the reason why we split, though, the x with that horizontal line is because whatever number for a that we had originally needs to go in kind of like this bottom section here. Let me quickly explain why. The very first step in factoring this expression was we needed to multiply a to c. And because we multiplied here, we need to make sure that we divide a back out of our answer, right? It has to do with equality. Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. Whatever you do to the numerator, you have to do for the denominator, etc. So same thing here. If I multiplied in, I need to make sure I divide back out. But the idea is still exactly the same. These two numbers right here, where the question marks are, these are going to be factors of whatever number is sitting in the top of this x. And then, of course, you can go ahead and make sure that when you rewrite the equation with its factors, you want to make sure to divide these values here. So let's go ahead and let's actually take a look at an example to show you that. But okay, so in this equation here, they're asking us again to factor and solve. But as I'm looking through this equation, I noticed that my first term, 3x squared, my a value is not 1. It's actually, in fact, 3. So first thing, as per usual, what we need to do is we need to set the equation equal to 0. This is a must, because if not, we cannot use the zero product property rule. So we get 3x squared plus 10x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, just like I said earlier, I'm going to take this a term, which is 3, and I'm going to multiply it to my c value. So what we get after doing that is it now says x squared plus 10x plus 9 is all equal to 0. All right, let's go ahead and let's set up our x with a line going across the middle. Again, this line means to divide. So just writing that there as a reminder. The number that goes on the top is going to be that 9. The number that's going to go on the bottom is still our b value. So that right there is positive 10. And then the number that I multiplied with c, in other words, my original a value, that number, I'm going to write down here on the bottom of that horizontal line. So we get 3's on each side. Again, everything else remains the same. So what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for factors of positive 9 this time. Now, these factors of positive 9 also have to add to 10. Well, taking a look at the factors, we have 1 and 9. We also have a negative 1 and a negative 9, because that also gives us positive 9 when multiplied. Or we have positive 3 and positive 3, or negative 3 and negative 3. So these are just our options. But if we go ahead and if we were to add the numbers in each pair together, we find that the only one that adds together to be 10 is a positive 1 and a positive 9. So those are the numbers that are going to go on the top here. And then here is what I meant by you need to divide the factors with the number that's on the bottom. So if I look on the left side of this x, I have 1 divided by 3. This is 1/3. We actually can't simplify this anymore, so I'm going to leave it as 1/3. Now, looking at the right side, though, I have 9 divided by 3. This we can actually go ahead and simplify. And this actually ends up becoming, let's see here, 9 divided by 3. This is, of course, 3. So, writing out my factors, here's what we actually have. We have x plus 1/3 times x plus 3. And this is, of course, all equal to 0. Now, to actually write our appropriate factors, here's what I need to do. I need to actually take the denominator here, and I'm going to move it back to be the coefficient of x. In other words, the number in front of x. The reason why we do this is because if I don't, and if I try to check my answer by distributing, right, or foiling out this expression here, I would actually not get back the equation that we see up here. It's not going to be the exact same. So that's one of the steps we need to take in order to make sure that we're factoring correctly. But from here, we can go ahead and set each of these factors equal to 0. So we get 3x plus 1 is equal to 0, and we also have x plus 3 is equal to 0. Solving for x, I'm going to go and subtract 1 on both sides. This gives me 3x is equal to -1. And then, of course, last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and divide by 3 on both sides as well. And so for my answer on the left side here, on the left factor, we get x is equal to -1/3. For the other factor, we're going to go ahead and we're going to subtract 3 on both sides. And we are just left with x is equal to -3. All right, and that is how you use the x method to factor and solve when your a value is not equal to 1. All right, so go ahead and pause the video here and see if you can give this one a try on your own. All right, so go ahead and double check over your work. Again, first step is to, first of all, set the equation equal to 0. So we need to go ahead and subtract 5x on both sides. Keep in mind that I'm not going to write this -5x on the end. Because if I do, I'm going to get confused with my C term versus my B term. So we want to make sure that our exponents, the power of our exponents, are in order x squared, x to the 1, and then x to the 0. Now, after we multiplied the 2 on over to my value for c, I went ahead and drew in the x right over here on the left side, and then I made sure to put the number 2 in the bottom area on the left and right sides. We found our factors, and then what I did here was I divided -6 and +2. That gave me a -3. And then 1 divided by 2 is simply just a 1/2. So here are our factors, x minus 3 and x plus 1/2. Again, just to make sure that we are clear and we have the correct factor written out, we're going to go ahead and change this to 2x plus 1. In other words, I'm taking my denominator here and I am moving it to the coefficient of x right here. But after that, we can go ahead and we can set each of these expressions equal to 0. We get that x is equal to 3 and x is equal to +1/2. All right, so that's it for your factoring and solving polynomials review. Thank you very much for watching.